And we're live. Welcome everyone to Closer2Closers episode 2. We're getting even closer. So I'm really excited because today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, a good friend of Glenn Coco's. Chris, how are you doing today?
I can't complain, man. I've been grinding, progressing some opportunities, doing a little prospecting, and was excited to have our conversation.
Awesome. So before I intro you, Chris, the Closer2Closers podcast, the goal here is, we're like, hey, can we talk to enough killer AEs, awesome SDRs, intelligent RevOps people, visionary sales leaders, just to learn like what are the best practices that go towards making yourself or your org or your team get closer to being closers, right? And my true hope here is to learn through osmosis. But before we kick anything off, like what I'd love to do is let you introduce yourself. Could you tell me a little bit about sort of your sales journey and your background and how you ended up doing what you're doing today at Bestman?
Absolutely. I grew up in a bubble of a place called Naples, Florida, where people clap for the sunset. It's an older population. And the typical choreography of any person who grows up there is they want to get out of the bubble and see a little bit more of the world and experience a little bit more diversity. So I ended up going to Georgetown University in DC, which was super international school, studied abroad in Madrid, Spain. And it was in that time that like I wasn't the greatest like straight A student. I did well enough in my classes. I got like a 3.3 GPA. And I took some like business classes, majored in economics, but ultimately in that time I discovered that I loved people. I was pretty good at connecting with people. I had a good, social life. And I realized I wanted to go down a career path where I could get paid to build relationships and express that passion for people.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed talking too, and you get to do a little of that in sales. But of course, fast forward, one thing you learn is that active listening, is way more important than what you say and being a great talker. But anyways, one reason again that I stumbled on sales and I saw it as a path for me at that time was I love people. The second was I had this thing in me. I just wanted to be great. I wasn't even necessarily money motivated, although I had dreams to make a lot of money and be financially free. But I just always wanted to reach my potential, and I felt I was called to do big things. And what's turned out to be the case, being in tech sales now for 10 years, working at Oracle, Google Cloud, and now as a second founding US seller at a global startup, is that tech sales demands that you become a better version of yourself on this path. You got to pick up a phone and interrupt strangers, which requires courage. Obviously, you got to sharpen your communication skills and learn to listen and influence to drive results. And it really demands you become more effective with your time and energy. And there's just so many fruits of this path in terms of self-development. And I feel like tech sales has made me a greater person. So you got a taste when I name drop some of the companies I've worked at, but I've been at a range of large enterprise tech, as well as now being at a startup, which has been fun and exciting. And so that's a little bit about my journey, an origin story, getting into technology sales.
I love it. And I think something you said about how like tech sales demands that you become a better person, right? I think that a lot of people sort of, there's a fair amount of cynicism, right, that comes with any kind of motivational content in the space. And I feel like part of the reason why is because there's just so much of it, right? There's just so much motivational content, like, grind set TikTok exists and like all these things exist. So I feel like genuine motivational content ends up getting sometimes lost in the weeds. But I think what might be helpful is, could you talk to me about, your journey so far, like some of the highlights and what were some of like the core upgrades that you yourself experienced, right? Like over the course of your journey in tech sales, what are the things that you feel like you've gotten better at from when you started to now?
Yeah, so I started at Oracle out of college, and I'll admit I was fortunate that I went to a top university. So that's a signal to companies and recruiters that, leads to them coming to campus. So I didn't didn't go to college and grinded and prospected my way into a top tech company. So I did actually have a fairly like low friction path thanks to going to a good university. But once I got in, after being in the SDR role at Oracle for a handful of months, my manager sat me down and he said, "Chris, how does it feel to be last?" And I was, yeah, I
Ah,
that grinded my gears, man. I was pissed, and I even had a defensive, insecure reaction at the time of that. I don't even know if sales is right for me. I don't even know if I want to be here. I'm not passionate about sales, and I was being a little, you know what. But
yeah.
the reality is, my actions, how I responded, was I became number one. And so what I learned about myself is, and this is common with top sellers, is top sellers hate losing more than they like winning. And so that just like I had a sports background, and that manager Jarrell, he really shaped my career, and that was a pivotal moment. He knew how to motivate me. In my case, I actually do get pretty motivated when I'm challenged and
Hmm.
called out, and it usually leads to me rising up to reach my potential. So I think in that the moment of transformation, I made a decision that I actually did want to be great at tech sales. I took ownership to do the things that I needed to do. And like in the entry level SDR role, one of the things you can do to just accelerate your success and path to promotion is play the numbers game.
Yeah.
There's a thing called the law of averages, and whether it's in baseball or actually, I don't know, I'm no statistician, but they like, you might have heard of the term, right? If you get enough at bats, take enough shots based on the law of averages, you're going to eventually have success. And in that first role, the cool thing is the more activity, which is completely under your control, the more conversations you'll have and the more potential opportunities. So I really upped my numbers. I took ownership just to work harder. I found mentors like account executives to model after, to pull their tricks of the trade. So that's actually a fundamental nugget, as I shared, just kind of a stream of consciousness here. In terms of mastering a role that you've never done before and getting promoted quickly, whether it's from SDR to AE or AE to field, is find someone who's done it and steal. Like in college, cheating was a bad thing, but in sales, it's a great thing. You're going to make sure to, cheat, and you'll get ahead. And I learned that, I could pause after wrapping up this like first part of my Oracle journey, but I learned the importance of building your internal relationships, like connecting with account executives, learning what makes them tick, figuring out where you can bring value. I remember Jim said, I want to break into this account. And if I could actually do it and deliver, I'd make him look like a hero. And eventually he'd become my advocate to help elevate me to promotion. And so, I networked, man, and figured out all the best territories at Oracle, because it's a monster company with many lines of businesses and many solution sets. And I landed on national tech named accounts. I went to Mike Quinn, the sales director, proactively. I asked him what he was looking for, shared my intention to succeed. I eventually got in the interview process for his team. And I landed a role that set me up covering like AAA, Bank of Tokyo, Mitsubishi, and Union Bank to hit my number halfway through the year, taking 2-hour lunch breaks. And it wasn't even a real sales role, honestly, as an order taker. Okay, you need like 650,000 in database. How about performance tuning and encryption add-ons? Okay, cool. Now it's $1 million. It wasn't a true sales role, but because of how I networked, man, set me up to get in the right territory and timing, which has a huge impact on our success. So the point is, I think it's driving home the importance of networking internally to navigate to the right spot. I mean, dude, obviously we've got lessons from Google and Bespin, but that's
so let's pause for a second there. And I think, I think the two things that you've touched upon, like I think one, right, like this competitiveness aspect is something I see as like a core trait in all salespeople. Like, I feel like you love the game, you love to win, you hate to lose, right? And I think these things are like core to sales. Like it's core to competition, it's core to winning, right? And like sales is in many ways, like it's kind of, at least the way we have structured it as a society, it functions a lot like a competition, at least between salespeople, right? And that's when like you start feeling that sort of pressure to drive. And then I think the other thing that you touched upon is like your networking. So your like your own journey has leveled up your game a bunch of times. And like what I was asking that for is because you said like tech sales demands you be like a better version of yourself, right? So what I'd love to do is, could you talk to me about, I think you're like interestingly positioned because you are like a person with a ton of enterprise sales experience, and you're also kind of taking on the teacher and mentor role by like doing your own coaching and training up callers and training up salespeople and things like that. So what do you see is like the biggest delta, right? So like for the people that come to the very like the base camp of sales skills, like looking to learn, looking to climb the mountain, for someone who's made their way up the mountain like a fair deal, when you look back at these guys that are like, hey Chris, teach me how to sell, right? Teach me how I can be a good salesperson. What is your approach, or like what do you see in these guys that is usually lacking, and how do you start kind of cultivating that in somebody who's like absolutely new?
Yeah, one thing I think of is developing self-esteem and in just a sense of confidence that you can hang with executives, especially when you're a young seller. It's easy to feel imposter syndrome, and I certainly felt it when I started out as an SDR at Oracle 10 years ago. And at Oracle, they'd bring around like beer carts and stuff, or like we'd go for a boozy brunch. And I'm not going to lie, sometimes I got pretty buzzed, and then I was calling C-levels. So I felt like I didn't know what I was talking about. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, this executive knows way more than I do, right? And which is true, like in terms of their job. But I think it's important to, I mean, this sounds a little cheesy, but like you gotta, like one thing is just fake it till you become it, and realize that by getting in the fire and failing and getting rejected, you're actually going to build thicker skin and become more resilient, and realize that rejection and failure is not a big deal. And you realize that you could call an executive and get rejected, you completely fumble it. And then some people I've heard even have called them back the same day, or a week later, or a month later, and set the meeting.
Yeah.
So failure is only temporary. It's not permanent. There's no failure really, just learning. You can assess like, what could I have improved on? But just embracing that, like, it's okay to feel imposter syndrome and anxiousness, but the greatest way to become more confident and learn and become better at any skill, particularly cold calling, is to learn through doing. Just like you don't hop on or read about riding a bike, you hop on a bike and ride, and you'll scrape your knee in the process, but you get back up and keep going. And so I think that is a mistake, is people sometimes overanalyze and delay action and think I'm not ready, but you are ready. And it starts like taking action, and failing is the beginning point of ascending on your journey. Obviously, I mentioned this before, but like one of the greatest fast tracks to success in sales is just to find at least one mentor, one high performer, and not try and be creative and come up with this unique cold call approach or unique cold email approach, but steal what works for them.
Yeah.
And I've heard it said, because I've had a lot of podcast guests, imitate first and then innovate on top of it. And so, I mean, that's what comes to mind first. Like, and I think that like one theme more broadly in sales, and I learned this lesson most recently at a startup where I could sell to any and all prospects in the world. And I'd sound dramatic, but I don't have a defined sales territory. I need to go hunt and focus on the right targets. Not all prospects are created equal. And so getting great clarity on the ideal client profile, maybe the size of the organization and their characteristics, what industry, their tech stack, whatever it may be for the specific company you're selling for, and getting a very clear picture of that to know how to pick out the right targets and only chase what I call the dolphins, mid-sized opportunities, or the whales. Now, you need to understand the pricing model in order, maybe you sell SaaS based on number of licenses. And if you're in sales SaaS, it's like number of sales reps in a department. And so you need to be able to have an eye to scope the right accounts that are either a dolphin or a whale. Like whales are monster opportunities that could change your quarter, year, and career. And focusing on those, and not reaching out to accounts that are unprofitable or small, or setting a meeting with the janitor, which is an extreme example, like of focusing on one persona. And so, That's just another example, man. Like focus is so important. And if SDRs can come into this path and get real good at scoping and being snipers, and then being effective at setting meetings with high potential accounts,
Mm-hmm.
their AEs will love them. The business will love them because there's going to be a higher probability of those converting to opportunities and deals. And if you're an SDR and you can point to revenue you've sourced, you can hang your hat on that to get promoted to AE. And that's what I did at Oracle.
That's awesome.
Promotion. So there's, hey, I could probably come up with an even better answer than what I just said, but those are just stream of consciousness, what's coming to me.
No, hey, no, I think this is great. And that's the whole point of this podcast. Is just like, let's have a conversation about it and we'll arrive at something. And let me do some quick product placement and turn this light on. So
yeah. And go ahead. I was just like, obviously cold calling is a unique skill, and like we could get into that, or cold email, copywriting and things. But so happy to go there. But anyways,
yeah. So kind of what I wanted to like spend the rest of this with is like, you mentioned a lot of things like about how important like the data piece is, right? So you're talking about like understanding the prospect, understanding where they sit in their organization, understanding the organization's viability as an ICP. And then you also talk about like, the piece of this is just like timing, right? Like you're trying to touch somebody at the right time. So it could be finding the right person, finding the right company, right? Finding the right messaging. All of these things are time agnostic a little bit. But then like getting them to stick, that's all on timing. And that's like, you can look for timing signals, but you're still playing that sort of numbers game. So
yeah,
building up the thick skin against rejection is like step one, right? Like the worst they can say is no is like something that I probably want to get tattooed on myself at some point, because that's it, right? Like you need to overcome that fear to get on there.
You're getting me fired up, and I'm interrupting you because I just have to say, like, every day in sales, I get to play the prospecting lottery. Like, what could go right? I get to gamble. I take a risk that could lead to a monster upside, an opportunity that could change my quarter, year, and career. My biggest deal at Google Cloud when I started as an AE there was with OfferUp, a $10 million commit over 3 years. And I cold called Arian, the CTO at the time. Wow. And so first off, it started with a cold call. It was actually my first cold call at Google, but it led to a monster deal. And I've seen all the biggest deals in my career. Most of them started with a cold call, being willing to pick up the phone and interrupt a stranger's day, knowing that based on research, there's value I could bring to the table. And that if I sat on my hands, or at least sent out cold emails and LinkedIn messages, and then sat on my hands at hoping they would respond and it'd catch their attention when their inboxes are more flooded than ever, I would be playing the victim. I'd be leaving my success up to chance. So, cold calling is such a powerful tool, and like, there's only upside, man. Like, you could win the biggest deal of your career. The downside is, a worst case, you get rejected, but any like negative emotions we have in response to rejection is all the story we make up about what it means. And it's like, how can a prospect even reject us? They don't know us personally. And are they even rejecting us, or maybe they're just rejecting the offer? Do they have
I think that what you just said, like that piece is something that a lot of reps sort of, I think it's the way I think of it is people take it too personally, right? And sales today, it's not like relationships, all of these things are key to like getting your foot in the door, et cetera. But ultimately people are making value oriented decisions, right? Like nobody is giving, even if you were like the most suave sales guy on the planet, and like, nobody's giving away $10 million if it's not a solution that solves their problem, right? So like that's sort of where the conversation, I think that's sort of where a lot of salespeople miss the bus, where they start taking rejection personally. It's like, dude, no, you're pitching a solution to somebody and they just told you they don't need the solution. That's it. That's what a rejection is. They're saying, hey, the solution as you've laid it out to me today does not appeal. And that's okay. That's okay to hear. That's normal, right? Like you don't buy something every single day, but when you need something, right, and someone reaches out to you and gives you the compelling offer at the right time, at that point, it's actually value accretive. And then you might say yes. So I think a lot of like what I tell a lot of salespeople is just like, hey man, don't take rejection personally. Like it's not, because it's not personal. You're not even representing yourself alone, right? Like you're representing an organization that's selling to another organization, and you're selling something that is going to solve a problem for that organization. And the guy you're selling to is just the steward or the guy that owns that problem, right? So as long as you're able to talk about value and solutions, like rejection shouldn't feel personal, right?
Absolutely. And one thing that's important early on for sellers is not only we talked about building like belief in yourself and partly building thick skin and confidence through rejection therapy and like just getting out there and realizing failure isn't that bad. Another is building your belief in your company and your solution. It's important to foundationally take time to, of course, you'll study case studies and look at some of your amazing customers, especially if you're at a big enterprise tech company or a nice startup that has big brands as their customers, and read those case studies to see, why was the customer delighted with the solution? What business problems did you solve? The core aspects of business value are driving top line revenue, accelerating time to market, reducing costs, reducing time or improving productivity, and reducing risk. So ultimately, for any solution we sell, we want to connect our solution to business value, especially when talking to executives. But look at the common patterns in those case studies of the business value offer, the pain points solved. Read, see what personas are being quoted. Is it the CTO or the director of marketing? And what did they say about the product? And so really like build your belief by reading these case studies with great companies and collect an arsenal of stories that you have to pull out at the right time, bringing a relevant story, ideally tailored to the industry of the prospect you're reaching out to, that resonates, because stories are the most powerful form of communication. Apparently, fMRI scans show when in studies, fMRI scans are done of the brain and they sync up when we're in storytelling mode. And so build your belief that way, but also, and I've done this at a startup, reach out to your subject matter experts like I did with Pratik, who's our head of data analytics, who has delivered solutions for clients and directly heard from them on why they love us. And he was able to walk me through a customer story, and I was able to ask questions to probe into the concrete value that we brought. Like, okay, we helped solve this technical problem. Why did that matter? What did that unlock for them from a business perspective? And then so going a step beyond reading case studies and talking to your subject matter experts and technical counterparts, you'll have even more concrete specificity to which you can speak to the problems that you solve, and that will show your competence to prospects. And so just to wrap up on compelling messaging, I think the two aspects that increase the impact of messaging, whether it's a cold email where you're trying to get them to read and respond, or a cold call where you're trying to book a meeting, is relevance and specificity. So relevance is like a very relevant business problem tailored to their industry, or a business outcome achieved. And specificity is how concretely can you describe the outcome in absolute terms. So I was coaching one of my students who wants to get into Webflow because he's coming from a marketing background, and he's like, this is my dream company because I've used their technology and I've done the old way and it's so much better. And I helped him go through this exercise of reading case studies. And one of the value adds of this solution, it turned out, was that it would accelerate time to market for producing new page builds. And that's at a high level. But then I saw in one of the case studies, it said it took the time to build a new page from 2 weeks to 2 days.
Yeah.
It's you can put that in the messaging. We helped XYZ company not just accelerate time to market for page builds, but reduce the time spent on page builds from 2 weeks to 2 days, saving X amount of dollars in man hours. And, you can get even more specific, and you can then bring that up to when you're making a cold call, and you can share, we help them improve their process and save this much time, as I described in absolute terms. I'm curious, how are you managing that process today? How long does it take you to build out your pages? So just some more thoughts.
Yeah. So what I'd love to do is, I think there's so many valuable nuggets that you have. I'd actually like to kind of go down the sales funnel, or what a sales funnel might have, and talk about some of your best tips at each of those stages. So, you talked a little bit about this, but generally top of funnel, what kinds of how do you approach early stages of the sales funnel, right? with prospecting, what are your best practices for list building? Because I feel like a lot of people are just like tool oriented about it. They're like, I have Zoom Info, or I have Apollo, or I have Clay, right? Like they start talking in terms of tools and less in terms of like, hey, this is who I want to reach out to, and here's why I think these people versus the larger set is more important. So like, what are your best practices for getting together a short list of people that you want to sequence out to or call out to?
Yeah, it all starts with targeting the right prospects and personas. And like, obviously you want to get clear on the right personas. Like, and particularly I usually take a top down approach and I start with C-levels or VPs that can actually impact business decisions, who also then, if bought in on the vision, can pass me down to the technical people. And it's coming from the top. Like today I had a meeting with a SVP of infrastructure and security. And it's because I built a relationship with the CTO or CIO, his boss. And so it's coming down from the CIO. And of course, him and his whole team gathered around and was eager to meet because it came from the top. And it all started with building that executive relationship. So obviously you want to get clear on your personas, and I tend to go top down. Now I jump to personas. We'll get back to like accounts and ICPs in a second, but top down is actually really good for the reason I described, because if you do get you could get stuck at a lower or mid level. They're not bubbling you up to the top. And I've had times too where I was stuck at a director level and then I went to the CIO, his boss, and he wasn't ready to answer questions the CIO came to him about. And I actually got wrist slapped and he was pissed. And then it was when I was at Google Cloud, I lost a pilot to Azure. It was an ML and AI workload. Mm-hmm. Now, I handled it well where I wasn't too effusive and I apologized, but then let it go. And then I got another shot at another deal. And that's the beauty of sales in general, right? Yeah. And especially when you're selling at a Google Cloud or infrastructure platform, there's so many ways you can help a business. And there's so many projects. But the point is that's a challenge of starting too low. Is you could get caught. But also, it's funny. Some might say the best thing you can do is start out at a mid to lower level. I had Brian Lamana, who you probably know, on my podcast, and he's really good at outbounding, and he's been to President's Club many times. And one of the things he does when he's selling Gong, which is a sales software, as I'm sure obviously you know, and it's a well-known software, he'll find like a new account executive or a new enablement person in sales, because ultimately he's trying to get to the CRO. That's his executive decision maker. Right. But he'll reach out to them to gather intel about what's going on at the company. And the seller and the enablement person, although they're not going to make the decision, they probably know about the strategic initiatives and challenges in the sales org. And he'll gather that info and then use that to craft the most compelling message possible. Saying, I talked to Susie on your team, one of your AEs, and she shared that these were the key priorities. You're trying to get in more conversations to top of the funnel, this and that. Right. I'm curious, would you be interested in having a conversation? And so that actually, it's funny because I said start at the top, but it also can be powerful to start at the bottom for that reason and learn on the inside on how to make a message that is so compelling that they can't. They can't.
I mean, that's such a solid nugget. And I think the distinction is like when you're pitching, I think you want to pitch to the top, but you want to run discovery. Like the value, like the barrier to be able to do discovery is much lower at the bottom, right? I think, I think about this from like a sales-led versus PLG motion, because I'm like from like a growth entrepreneurship kind of angle, and I find that when you're doing like an outbounding sales motion, generally my feel is you want to go as high up the totem pole, as close to the economic buyer as possible, right? But when you're doing PLG, when you're trying to build inbound, you want all of your messaging and content to be geared towards like the end user, like the closest to the end user persona as possible, because that's who the content's going to be most valuable to. So I think, if like doing research or like outbounding out to like the lower end, like the end user people of your persona, and then using that information to strengthen your pitch to the top is that's like a great idea.
And so here's the thing, there's no silver bullet in sales. So you try top down for sure. and you might be able to gather really compelling insights for a public company after reading their 10K. You might go to, which is just for the audience, the 10K is like a public report to the SEC on the, strategic direction of the company, the financial status. And there's a key section called the risk factors that I've always focused on. Because one of my mentors originally at Oracle, when I was the first time AE, he would make $1 million a year in Flash's W-2. So a little bit of an ego, but to prove he made $1 million a year. He was unbelievable, like a top consultant, Steve. And he said, Chris, the risk factors are the greatest fears of the CFO. And so even recently, I was reaching out to, I don't know if it's like $2 to $5 billion bank, a good sized enterprise bank company based in Dallas. Enterprise bank company sounds a little clunky. And I in my messaging, I said, hey, I was reading your risk annual report and on page 22, and the second bullet of your strategic technology risk factors, I noticed you said the future of your company depends on your ability to keep up with the latest technology and specifically cloud computing. And if you don't keep up, the business, you're at risk. We like plug in then. We work with other banks just like you with a financial services industry to migrate to the cloud with less risk and time, modernize their investments, and keep up with the latest technology, adapting to recent rulings like 1033, which that's an industry specific thing, like a new ruling for banks. But and so the point is, man, it's like you can leverage your research to get extremely tailored, but obviously talking to someone on the inside, you can learn a lot too. But that's your next best bet if you don't get someone on the inside. Obviously, you look at the website. I like to look at their mission and values, especially when I was at Google, which is a very mission-oriented, value-driven company. If I saw another startup, including OfferUp, they were talking about 10x thinking. We talk about that. And so there's like little synergies you can call out. I noticed shared values around 10x thinking. You obviously need to keep up with compelling events, the latest news. What types of events, this is on you as a seller to know, introduce a need for your solution. If I see a company acquires another company, they're going to need to consolidate their infrastructure and data, and that's going to lead to a migration opportunity for me. We can come in and help with that process. So ask yourself, like with your solution you're selling, what's a compelling event? Obviously, there are things like leadership changes when a new CTO that comes in. I know they're probably going to want to shake things up and make the strategy their own. So they might be open to ripping and replacing technology. I've even seen new CTOs or CIOs or C-levels replace technology that was just implemented because of, candidly, like their ego, and they wanted to make a change and make it.
And like the fastest way to make a mark, you're like, switching up personnel, switching up technology, like switching up, vendors. That's like the fastest way. You're like, oh, I'm like making an impact.
So keep up with these compelling events, and you need to know for your company what those are. And like layoffs could be a compelling event. I'm at a managed services company. As you can tell, we sell a lot of things, but we plug in people, engineers at a fractional cost of full-time employees. Well, if you did layoffs, you're trying to save money, and you're probably not going to be able to bring on a full-time person. So boom, that's compelling for me. But you can leverage like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, Google Alerts and things. And there's, honestly, my buddy has a company, Sift AI, that helps plug into, an organization's like marketing materials and sales collateral, and then understand their ICP and look at the like data on the web and keep track of like compelling events for you. So there's a lot of ways to try and do it. But I wanted to hit on like choosing the right company, which is actually comes before the personas. Like we need to assume the right persona and apply these tactics to, get in with the right people. But choosing the right company is important. And then you did hit on like the importance of follow-up, man. And so I want to hit on that too. I have to
100%. Like so I have questions about like the follow-up, specifically about follow-up and like the delta between like the initial outreach and the meeting. But one thing I wanted to quickly ask you about was, I think what you've generally been talking about up until this point is how like information helps you personalize your messaging and personalize your outreach. And I feel like a lot of salespeople, right? And this is something that I've realized, like you're going to learn about your tool in a theoretical space. So like whatever you're selling, people teach you sort of like the theory of it. Like, hey, this tool solves these problems, and it's like very academic and theoretical, right? And it's like, this is how my tool solves these kinds of problems. But in the sales world, right, like that theoretical knowledge, if you just go and present it as is, it's going to ring hollow, right? Like it's not going to resonate as much as because as like a personalized version, because that is practical knowledge, right? Because all of these guys are like, I don't want to know how your solution solves this general problem, right?
Yep.
Like I want to know how it solves my problem, right? Like I want to know how it solves mine. And I feel like that's sort of where a lot of the personalization stuff you're talking about comes through.
You're so right. And it's also relevance, right? So tailoring to industry specific business problems. So if I reach out to like someone running e-commerce in retail, rather than saying we help companies with like data, better use their data to drive revenue, we work with other e-commerce leaders like yourself in the retail space to better attribute their Google advertising spend to where it's making the biggest impact, leveraging data. So to be able to say which campaigns are actually working and driving top line revenue and which aren't, to be more efficient with advertising spend. And that leads to like greater revenue. So I went off the cuff with that. So like, obviously you want to keep it crisp, but that's an example of like a specific pain point I'm talking about, which is rather than, oh, we help people with their data platforms and in general, we can help you specifically in retail improve your attribution and like revenue through solving this like an attribution challenge. So, but I did want to hit because you asked me originally like on targeting, and let's say that just to round out, you have the right personas, but you need the right companies. You need to reach out to the right ones. If you are in a role like me, it could be at a startup where you can reach out to any and everyone. You need to understand clearly your ICP. What key industry verticals are you selling into? Where, like, if you look at your current customer base and the data, like where the bulk of your current customers come from? Are they healthcare, retail? Are they industry agnostic? Ideally, you pick a couple industries where you can really become an industry expert. Like I gave an example of retail. I learned that, attribution on the marketing side is really important. They're also trying to provide more personalized customer experiences and build recommendation engines. They're trying to achieve XYZ in retail. It helps to focus on specific industry verticals. What's the ideal like size of your ideal client profile? For me at my current company, we found there's a sweet spot of mid-market enterprise companies within 100 billion to 2 billion in revenue. If bigger than 2 billion in revenue, sometimes they're so large, they don't want to work with a partner. And otherwise, if they're like a 10 million in revenue manufacturing company, they don't spend enough on cloud typically. And they're just kind of too small. And so understanding that sweet spot in terms of like size, like either revenue and employee count, and then you can get more nuanced, right? Like, are they using certain technologies? But getting clear on those ideal clients and what they look like, and only focusing on, as I said this before, but the dolphins and whales, that like mid-sized to large deals, avoiding what I call the minnows. So you need to know how to scope out a account that they're so small, like I'm not going to make any money. I'm going to invest my valuable time in pursuing them, and they're going to take just as long as a big deal, and they're probably painful. And what do I get in return? Nothing. So it's a waste of my time and resources and the business's resources. So avoid minnows like the plague, and then keep track of compelling events at these target companies you identified. And then within, like, let's say you're in a role like I was at Oracle or Google, where I had a set book of business. In fact, at Google Cloud, I had 15 accounts that were kind of large companies. I then took the time to segment them based on like the health of their business, their revenue, and their growth as a business. I'd use, like, we had a tool called Intricately where we could try and assess their cloud spend. There's other metrics we figured out we could look at, like venture capital funding. And we're like, okay, if they got this much venture capital funding, we could say their cloud spend might be X% of that. And so I think within your own book of business, if you have a limited book of business, segment to the highest potential customers. And then you could also look at within your customer base, are there some small spenders that are like using us a little bit? Because companies who buy with you today and do business in some way are more likely to buy more from you. And so that's actually a nuanced thing, is to find customers, at least in the consumption-based model of cloud, that if they spend a little bit, but they have a huge upside and you only have a small percentage of what I call their wallet share, and say AWS has the most of it, that's when I should really focus on, because we already have a little bit of relationship, but there's a huge upside to capture. And finally, like if you're at a monster company like Oracle or Google, let's say they use Google Workspace and I'm selling Google Cloud, that's a warm synergy. We can leverage that, and I actually might prioritize them for that reason.
Yeah.
Or like, final thing is, there was one like company, they're called like ZipWhip, a marketing technology. And I Googled Google and ZipWhip, and I noticed that, we have a partnership around RCS, Rich Communication Services. I didn't even know what that meant, but I reached out to the CMO. I said, hey, I appreciate our partnership on the RCS side. I'm reaching to extend myself as a resource to help us grow on the Google Cloud side. And what do you know, he got back so quick. And so that's another way to, based on familiarity and potential synergies, you could prioritize an account. So anyways.
So I think you got like account level prioritization, and then you have like your persona. It's like, hey, who at these accounts do I want to talk to, right? And then once you have that, you're like, hey, where are these guys at today in their day-to-day, right? Like what's relevant to them right now, what is pressing to them right now, and then all of your messaging is kind of tailored towards using all of the information you've gathered, right? Like the relevance pieces, like the degrees of separation from you, maybe, right? Like you use all of these to kind of arrive at that conversation. And then when you're on the conversation itself, right? Like I feel like a lot of salespeople, they just get so stoked, like because you're dealing with, when you're doing the cold calling, especially, like, you're dealing with no pickups, you're dealing with like quick, like, no, and then like, someone hangs up on you. People have asked me multiple times to go fuck myself, which is like, I've yet to take them up on it, but like it's I could. But I think people get so stoked when they're given the opportunity to pitch, that like that excitement ends up deteriorating the quality of pitch. You're like, you want to get everything out. You want to, like, oh, you're actually talking to me. Like, let me tell you everything. So I feel like part of that, like, to have that not happen, like when you get the permission to pitch. So like now you're on the call with the right person, or like in a thread with the right person, how much of your messaging, et cetera, is like pre-rehearsed, templated, and how much of it is like kind of, hey, you're building this or like creating this on a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, I think you do want to always have a value hypothesis prepared, reaching out to any prospect. And so you're ready when you're put on the spot. And again, it's going to be relevant and tailored to their industry. You're going to tell a customer story that illustrates relevant business problems and solved and outcomes achieved. And as I mentioned before, it's got to be concrete and specific. That example of like, we reduced website build time from 2 weeks to 2 days, saving X hours of man time. Like, that's a concrete outcome. And so you do want to prepare like those value statements ahead of time. So that's one of the most fundamental skills in sales, is preparation. But you also like want to be curious at the same time and not like jump to conclusions. And I can give you 2 examples when I was put on the spot. I'll just give you 2 examples of how I handled the opportunity to pitch. And they both were at Google, and I'll never forget them. I sent an email to the CEO of a call analytics software company. And by the way, it said Hoya Saxa from Google. Based on my research, speaking of personalization, I found out he went to my alma mater, Georgetown. There's a thing called group affiliation that is very powerful psychologically. I was part of the in-group, honestly, in that case. I went to the same university. So you obviously, with any prospect, want to do your due diligence, see if you have any warm synergies. Did you go to the same university? Are you from the same hometown? Or does he live somewhere you used to live? You support a similar cause, like your charity? There's a lot of like opportunity on LinkedIn. At least review their profile and see if you can find something warm. Sometimes you can. But that was a powerful subject line, man. The ultimate subject line is personalized like that. Absolutely. And he's like, whoa, Hoya Saxa from Google. I'll admit, being at Google, it helps. When you see Google, I was riding the coattails of unbelievable brand recognition.
Right. but that's
yeah.
true, right? That's true of a lot of salespeople today. Like, there are people working at companies that have like the brand recognition, etc. But they're still dealing with the problems and like the difficulties of just doing sales. So I think
also, to give some context, I was selling into the competition's backyard in Seattle. So Mark was in Seattle, where we ran it all on AWS, and OfferUp did too, right there in Seattle, where AWS invented the market, and Azure, Microsoft Azure's number 2, and they had much more market share than Google Cloud. So even though I had the sexy Google name, we were way behind. Now, and Google's continued to improve, and they're known as a good tech company. So I also got to give myself credit. Past reps in the territory didn't come close to their numbers. And I hit, I think it was actually like 97%, which, given that was one of the most difficult patches, where literally prospects were meeting with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, the week before me. I was really proud of that. So anyways, but Hoya Saxa from Google, and in this case, the message was really compelling because I read their 10K risk factors, and I called out, I noticed your investments in the Mind Innovation Lab and your risk factor of like trying to reduce your concentration risk from a cloud perspective. And I was able to tie in very specifically how our differentiation at Google Cloud aligned to it. The point is, man, it was so tailored. It was so compelling. Mark called me and I didn't expect it. And I said, hello, it was Mark from Marchex. And he said, hey, this is Chris. Yeah. So I got your email. Why Google Cloud? Why should we go with you? And so I was put on the spot, and that's an objection, by the way.
Yeah.
It's really an objection. And objection handling is the whole thing. And by the way, with those, you want to know objections that you're going to get and prepare in advance so that when you're put on the spot, you're ready. And I had prepared the following. I said, Mark, it just came to me. I'm actually pretty proud of this looking back. Mark, the last thing I want to do is talk your ear off about why I think we're a great fit for you and better than AWS when I don't really know your business. I did some research, but I need to learn more in order to give you a tailored answer to that. And if I talked your ear off, I'd be doing you and your business and our business a disservice. So can we set aside some time to dig in more into your priorities and current state? And I could share a more tailored answer to that question. And then you can decide if it makes sense to, progress conversations. And he's like, sure. So like that actually is a pro move. And by the way, I need to tie back to when you asked me about mistakes people make, or like when they're early in their career.
Yeah.
Mistake is actually thinking you know it all, or you need to be right and prove your value. In that case, you tried to make something up. But it's actually a superpower to lack knowledge sometimes and to just be like humble.
Yeah.
And to use not knowing as a reason for the next meeting. And then you can prepare. And so that is a pro move. If you're an SDR that doesn't think you know anything about what you're doing, which you should know something, you can use that. Like if you hear like why you guys, or like, a technical question that you don't know the answer to, you know what, that's a great question. That's a good reason for us to set up a conversation with one of our technical experts. He works with a lot of companies like yourself, and he can give you a really concrete answer. So I'm curious, are you free? And so I think that's key, Rit, is knowing that sometimes not knowing can be a great opportunity to set the meeting. And by showing that I wasn't going to jump to a conclusion or try and act like I was smarter than I was, and presenting a very logical case that like I need to understand you first and holding my ground, that was really effective. And what ended up happening, I kind of want to finish this story. Like I met with Mark before I know it. I'm having beers with him and his team out in Seattle. And eventually we're getting some business together when they were fully on AWS, which is a huge accomplishment. That's hard to take out the competition, who has much more market share and honestly is a better overall platform. And so not only that, but then I see an executive in Seattle and I do the ultimate 100% response rate cold outreach move, which wasn't cold. I said, Mark, I see you know the CEO. Can you warm introduce me? Sure. Boom. He sends a warm email intro and I meet with that CEO. And what he said in that email, I'm going stream of conscious today, but trying to share insights. It's like, he said, you know what, we're all on AWS and we're happy, but Chris and the team offered valuable education, access to technical resources, which has been invaluable, and even taught us more about our own current AWS investments. I highly recommend you meet. So that's a nugget from an executive that even if you're reaching out to prospects ingrained on the competition that have no reason to work with you, offering insight and education and access to resources is something you can lean on and be confident in as valuable to help them understand their options. And he revealed that was important to him in that warm intro that he made.
I think that's such an amazing nugget. First of all, like, just unbelievable that like you went and you were able to pitch like a Google Cloud deal to like in Amazon and Microsoft.
Yeah, and dude, I have to say, I have to, and I know we're probably on time, but after you finish this thought, I do want to share the other example, which was the OfferUp cold call.
100% want to hear about that. But I think like the key is people tend to like put on a play, right? Like nobody wants to watch a play. They want to have a conversation. And I feel like if you over rehearse your pitch, like, you know, and you're like, I say these things in exactly this order, you do yourself a disservice because that kind of robs you of your ability to improvise. But then like knowing the things that you should say for certain things, like a toolkit or like, you know, a conditional, like your utility belt of like objection handles and like case studies and stories, right? Like that, having that cultivated, I think really helped you out in that spot, right?
Yes. And I have to say, like I have like 20 cold call openers, and I just say like, try them on like clothing. You know, you want to use the opener that fits you best and feels best, right? It's about authenticity. Some people might do funny cold call openers like, hey, Red, you probably would rather be in jury duty right now than get a cold call from me. Do you want to roll the dice or hang up on me? Something like that. Like some people might be really uncomfortable and awkward with that. And I actually don't really use that, but others can absolutely rock it. Like I had a guest corporate bro that you might've heard of. And I think he was the one who came up with that. He's just a funny guy. And that was really effective. But one cold call opener that's worked for me, it's just real, man, is I was like, hey, you know, this is Chris calling from Bestman. I honestly hate making cold calls probably as much as you hate receiving them, but I thought it'd be really important to talk to you. Do you have 20 seconds for me to share why I'm calling? That's actually a really good one, is to show like you're a human, because calling is unnatural, honestly. Mm-hmm. And I do know some people, like one of my SDRs at Google, Ryan the Lion, he had such bravado. He actually loved it, and you can learn to love it. But just even admitting I hate making cold calls, like, oh, this is a human being. And so that's actually a really effective line for people that feel anxious. Now, the OfferUp thing, I'll hit on it real quick. But another example where I was put on the spot with an objection was OfferUp. And so I reached out to Arian. And again, this led to a $10 million deal. I said, Arian, hey, this is Chris calling from Google Cloud. I know I'm probably catching you in the middle of something. Do you have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? And that's a permission-based opener, and it got the opportunity to share. I said, hey, I actually wanted to invite you to Google Cloud Next. It's our biggest conference of the year coming up, and the ticket's like $1,000, and we can get it to you for free. Which, by the way, give to get, like being generous and offering value, whether it's a ticket to an experience like that with access to other leaders and resources, is great. If you can get someone to a lunch and your company will expense it, or a coffee, it really triggers reciprocity, and it's powerful. But in this case, I said, I would love to get you tickets. I went right to that because I have the firepower of Google resources at my disposal. I'm going to use it. I can love on this prospect who's high potential and worth it, right? $10 million deal. He said, we're all set. We're on AWS. And so the good news is I fully expected him to say that. Yeah. And I was able to handle this objection and earn the right to follow up and continue a conversation that led to the deal. And that was just the tip of the iceberg, that objection. What was behind it was preparation. I looked at all the data we had internally at Google Cloud on why customers specifically moved from AWS to Google Cloud. And there were a few reasons, and there were a couple that I found that were data and analytics is key to their business strategy, and global expansion is key to their business strategy. And there are reasons why we had a differentiated approach for those types of companies. I take those value drivers and differentiators. I go to research OfferUp, and I see that, they just got X 100 million in funding, and they're going to put it towards globally expanding. And also they're a data company and like driving their data platform. And what do you know? I match up our differentiators with their strategic business initiatives. And so we're all set on AWS. Area, I fully expected you to say that, and that's exactly why I called. Based on the data, looking internally at Google, we analyze why customers like yourself, growing digital native companies, move from AWS to Google Cloud. And there are 5 key reasons, but I think there's 2 in particular that really resonate based on research with your business objectives. 1, global expansion is critical to their business. We could get in the weeds, but at a high level, the network is designed in such a way with Google Cloud that actually leads to better availability, better performance, and avoiding missing out on business opportunities due to outage as you scale globally. In fact, there was I don't know if I kept it this long, but there's a quote from Home Depot's CIO saying that it was like you could light up data centers around the world. It was so easy. Another was, we understand data is important to your business, and that was a key differentiator for us. That is a differentiator at Google Cloud. We're a data company, and like I gave something concrete.
Yeah.
He is, man, like, I don't remember exactly, but when you say like data is a differentiator, you want to give something a kind of concrete, just enough to show you're legit, just like I talked about the network on the global expansion side. And so the point is, and I rounded out probably by saying something like, and so I really believe we can add value to your strategy, and we at least want you to be aware of your options. So curious, can we set up a conversation? And what he ended up saying is, hey, I'm moving to the board and we've got a new CTO coming in a few months, follow up then. And so I earned the right. And then I followed up in 3 months. I said, Arian, the former CTO, suggested I reach out. And then of course I sent a very personalized email to the new CTO. He responded within an hour. And before we know it, I'm meeting with him in office in Seattle. And again, got one of the biggest deals in my career. So I had to share that. And that's another example. Like obviously I had that smooth line of like, I don't want to do your business or out of disservice and assume, so let's set up a conversation to go deeper so I can offer a tailored solution. The other example, I actually did have very concrete research, like differentiators that I matched with their business objectives. Okay, so that's another example.
I think, first of all, unbelievable story once again, right? Like I think this is also part of why I love this podcast. I just love sales stories. Like I love hearing it. I love hearing, because to me, this is almost something that we, by the way, separately at Glen Coco, what we learned is, because we've been trying to figure out how do we identify like good salespeople.
Yeah.
10 times out of 10, I can tell whether someone's a good salesperson or not by how they tell me about their previous deals. Right? Like good salespeople, I feel like their previous deals, they wear them like a badge. Like I could wake them up in the middle of the night and they'd just be like, oh, like I closed this deal with this person and this is why, and this is how, and like, the same stuff that you were talking about. Like, but I think that sort of like that passion and like the memory of the story, like it's obviously like the dopamine hit from the win, but also I think being able to be like, hey, these were the things, critically analyze your successes and not just be like, got one, lucked out, and be like, no, but hey, what made this get past the post? And then you take the learnings from that and you apply it to your future outreaches, right? That's kind of how you get better too, iteratively. And I think that's one of the first things that you said, and just kind of to tie it all back together.
Amen. Right? And I have to say, like, at the end of the day, this tech sales path is a Trojan horse to living a life of freedom and impact. You can make outsized financial gains and put it towards financial freedom, build amazing relationships. Like we've built our relationship and kind of came through tech sales, honestly. Yeah. Teammates, my customers, and you become a better version of yourself. And the key is, if you have passion and you can feel my passion, that will take you places. You don't have to be perfect. I always joke, I've got this Rambler. I say, Rambler, the official sparkling water of sales reps who can't get to the point, right? And so the thing is, I am a talkative guy. Sometimes I am where I can be wordy or I can speak in tangents. And I even did that in my Google interviews with Bryce. Bryce Buffalo was one of my final Googliness interviews. But, Blake Horowitz, right? And I was interviewing with him, and I broke the rules. I wasn't like super succinct like you should be in the star format and all this stuff, but I was so passionate and it was all good stuff. And Blake said, Chris, I got to wrangle you in, but it's good. I got the job at Google, but the point is I wasn't perfect and I have my rough edges, right?
Yeah.
And Steve DeFusco, or shoot, it's fine. You could look him up. I gave his last name. That mentor who showed $1 million W-2s.
Yeah.
He actually talked a lot, and probably more than you should, right? So he kind of broke the rules. He wasn't perfect and polished, but it was so valuable. And so the point is, guys, you don't have to be perfect, but you have to have passion and desire, clarity of vision, and you have to take massive action. At the end of the day, sales is about getting on the court, taking risks, shooting shots, and failing forward. It's like the same with my YouTube, man. It's been like 3 years. I'm about to hit 1 million collective views, which is nice. It hasn't been a meteoric rise, but I expect it to blow up one day over time. And like, I've just been consistent, like brushing my teeth. It's like you want to be able to execute the habits of success and show up and take action every day, just like you're brushing your teeth. And so I just had to share that. And like the final thing is, Vinod Khosla of Sun Microsystems says that people give up too easily, and with enough persistence, the impossible becomes possible. Yep. And here's the thing, man. Like, my first deal ever that I closed at Oracle, I hung my hat on to get a promotion. It came after 9 months of radio silence, reaching out to database administrator with no response for 9 months. But finally, in Q4, radio silence turned into the rocket fuel that catalyzed my career when he got back with a $200,000 deal and my account executive was out at a bachelor party and I was able to step up and close it. Imagine if I stopped a touch point or two short, or if I wasn't a squeaky wheel consistently saying for 9 months, even though I have no response, that, hey, I'm here, I'm your account, or here from your team. We help with these challenges. I'm here to be a resource if you need us. That guy saw those touch points, and I bet he appreciated the persistence, and he was holding on to that to reach out to me when the timing was right. And you hit on that, Rit. Timing is everything. So like, if anything, follow-ups fuel the finances. And I believe like any prospect, it could be a $40 billion company that I've been reaching out to for a couple of years now, and I've made some inroads, but I believe with enough time, I will get them. And
you go. I think that's the thing, right? Like, timing is not in your control, but like relevance, personalization, like, all of these things are. So what you're doing by nailing it on all these other fronts is you're making sure that anytime the timing is right, you are 100% ready, right? So
I'm getting fired up, man. But I have to say, it's like, ask yourself, what is my ability to continue to take action with no indication that success will ever come? Like, with no immediate return. Like, that is powerful. If you can be committed, and partly you need a strong why, you need to have belief, you need to have a vision. But to, like, for example, a 9-month time frame, no response, but I kept going, and eventually it turned into an amazing opportunity. And I do actually believe in building like 6 to 9 month prospecting plans.
Yeah.
Starts with, multi-threading with the triple thread across cold call, LinkedIn, and email, and then following up over time. But anyways, it's a whole can of worms, but you get the point.
Well, Chris, I think we got plenty to have you on for another episode on another time. But I think this is a great place to wrap here. First of all, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on this call with me, man. Like, for me, just randomly outbounding you one day to like us just hanging out, I think this is like, the core of building relationships that we were talking about. I feel like this has been really valuable for me. There's so many nuggets in here, just like in this session that we've had. Appreciate you sticking it out with me. And I feel like I've become closer to being a closer. So far, episode 2, right on the money. Thanks so much for your time, Chris, and for everyone watching. Thank you. And I hope this episode has helped you become closer to closers.
Awesome.
Take care. Have a nice day.